Hey everybody, it's Marty Jacobson here from my very messy shop in Atlanta, Georgia. This Kentucky KM-140S just came in and it's got some issues. Nothing wrong with Kentucky as a brand, this instrument just needs to be set up. There's one weird issue, which is that the 11th fret is a smaller size fret wire than all the others. I'm not sure how that happens. So one issue is that this cheap rosewood bridge can't be lowered enough, and that results in what you might call manly action or cheese grater. And so that needs to be fixed. And also the action at the nut is very high as well. It's about 1.5 millimeters, which is unplayable. So, although this is a basic instrument, it can be set up to play perfectly well. We just got to get the frets leveled, the bridge the right height, and action at the nut dialed in. So, I'll walk you through that process. First thing we got to do, no joke, is clean up the shop, because I've been doing house projects, random stuff. Kids have been in here. I've been teaching my students at this makeshift work from home office over here. And so we'll take a minute and clean up the shop.
One of the best things you can do if you build and repair instruments is to get yourself some carpet flooring tiles. They have a really heavy backing that's great for doing glue ups and any kind of rough work. And then you flip them over and you got a perfectly clean carpet to work on.
At this point we have a general idea of what's going on. I always make sure that I play it for a second. Even if you don't consider yourself a great player, you can hear some buzzing and rattling that would be easy to fix when you've got it apart that you wouldn't know about otherwise. So just play a couple notes. Should sound good once we get it set up. We definitely have a nut slot issue that's causing some buzzing, possibly also a bridge slot issue, and this pick guard is rattling around, so we'll have to fix that. Nothing really too surprising, but good to know about so we can fix it while it's apart.
When action is this high, we don't bother measuring it, but something like the StewMac string height gauge or a free version that you can print out of paper for yourself is a handy tool to identify where your starting point is. This action clocks in at about 150 thousandths or 3.5 millimeters. I can also tell from using this gauge that I have some very unlevel frets that we'll have to deal with. The next step is to remove any elements that could fall off or get in the way as we're working. So we're going to remove the tailpiece cover as well as the pick guard and pick guard clamp. Do this carefully, and the most important tip I can give you is to use a screwdriver that's in good condition and actually matches the screw that you're working on. Buy an inexpensive screwdriver that fits the screws that you need to work with, and you'll avoid dinging or gouging things. Here you can see the pick guard clamp has been buzzing and dinging the top, so we'll pad that with a little bit of leather later. When I'm sure I've gotten everything loose uninstalled, I'll start taking off the strings. I slack them to the point that they're not going to fly all over the place or damage anything, and then I just cut them. It makes it easier, and these strings are way past any additional use anyway. If this was a really valuable instrument, I'd cover everything up with a t-shirt first before doing this, just to make sure I didn't get a stray ding. But looking at how most people beat up their instruments when they change strings, I don't think I'm going to do much worse than them. Seriously though, I do pull everything upwards as I'm removing strings to try to keep from damaging the headstock or anything as I do this. And I also get a handful of strings and then throw them away, make sure they do not stay on the table where they can scratch stuff up. Then I take the truss rod cover off to make sure there's a truss rod. Sometimes you might be surprised, and to make sure that the truss rod nut is nice and secure. But unless it's broken or obviously the geometry is wrong so I can't level the frets, I'm not going to do anything with the truss rod. The only mandolin truss rods I've ever had to adjust were ones that were adjusted improperly by their owners. Okay, time to start the fretwork. Black Sharpie is your most important tool in fretwork. You use it like layout die in machine shop class. Basically, it lets you see where the high and low spots are. So we're going to coat all the top of the frets, and don't worry, Sharpie comes right off with a little bit of denatured alcohol if you have a problem, or get it a little bit on the binding or something, it's not a problem. And then I'm just going to use a razor blade and try to identify any obvious spots that I might need to focus on. And then I'm going to take a nice flat maple sanding block with 600 grit sticky back sandpaper on it, and I'm going to start sanding. And because the Sharpie die is on the frets, I'll be able to see where the high and low spots are after just the first few strokes. I take an old church camp t-shirt from my kids and wrap the instrument up just to make sure I don't get anything all over it. And it's great for protecting the scroll of an F5 mandolin as well. Got to really look out for those F5 scrolls because they're right up there next to the frets, and it's so easy. Not saying I've done it, saying I've almost done it. Anyway, what you can see here is the shiny spots. The shiny spots are the high spots. The black areas are the low spots, so that's how you inspect as your first pass to see if the fretboard needs a lot of work or not. Here's a highly scientific way to remove the nut. Just bump up against it with a block. I do not recommend this. I actually do recommend removing the nut with a sharp tap on a block of wood, but only after using a razor blade to cut away any varnish that might be adhered around the nut, which is common. Basically, the process is just to keep sanding, trying to apply even pressure and focusing on the high spots until every fret has a perfect straight line gleam across the top of it. Then you know you're level. When I'm about there, I switch to 2000 grit to make it easier to inspect. 600 grit scratches at this kind of scale are actually kind of coarse. Surprisingly, all these frets leveled out, which is great. That means the fretboard's nice and flat. And these are now level but not crowned, which means they might be wider or narrower. So the next step is to crown them so they're nice and domed on top. At this stage, I do wipe a little mineral oil onto the fretboard. Wood that's no longer living doesn't need moisture or anything, and you wouldn't want to apply it directly to the surface if it did. But it does make it look better, and it removes any dust from the sanding process. The last thing to do is to crown and treat the ends of the frets. So we're going to start by reapplying our layout die with the Sharpie. And if you're going to do this more than once, I highly recommend investing in at least one fret crowning file. It does save a lot of time and makes sure that your frets are nice and symmetrical. If you're only doing it once, you can grind the edge to make a safe edge on a file and do it manually. It's not a lot of fun though, and you can gouge the fretboard pretty badly if you're not super careful. Now what I'm doing is I'm making the fret ends hemispherical with a small safe edge file. So I used the fret crowning file initially to kind of start to round this over, and now I'm taking 2 or 3 scooping file strokes to really turn those ends into hemispheres. This is not usually done on an instrument this low end, but it makes it feel really nice, and it doesn't take that long, maybe 5 minutes. If you get out your jeweler's loop, you'll see that these are not perfect hot dog shaped hemispherical fret ends. But you know what? This is about function, not appearance, and they don't feel any different than perfect ones. I just got them nice and round. Next, I'm taking the crowning file, and I'm going just until I see a hair width black line. So I've just left a tiny little bit of the Sharpie on the top of the fret, and that means that I've got the frets still perfectly level. I haven't messed them up. So make sure you leave a little tiny bit of Sharpie in the middle of the fret, or you'll mess up your level job. I'm doing this in a weird way because I didn't want to flip it around for the video, but make sure that you file downwards. You don't want to be lifting up any frets. When we've got the ends all treated and we're sure that we've got everything level, then we get out our straight edge and double check everything, try to look for any frets that might have popped or gotten loose, and it looks like everything's in good shape. I'm just double checking a few spots that I was worried about. Now I'm using 2000 to 3500 grit micro mesh to just smooth everything out, and I'm paying special attention to those corners to really round out those hemispherical fret ends. Another thing I'll do is tap lightly on each fret with a lightweight screwdriver or file. If there's a difference in sound, then I know that it needs to be glued in or it's come unseated. I also like to rub everything down really well with a cotton rag just to make sure that there's no sharp corners or fret ends that have lifted. At this point, I'll wipe the entire instrument down with mcguire's No. 9 Swirl Remover 2.0. I have no financial interest in this product other than the fact that I couldn't run my shop without it. And what I'm doing right now is cleaning all the stuff off the instrument so I can see what's going on. And I'm also just inspecting everything to make sure every glue joint is tight, to make sure every seam is nice and sealed, and to make sure that there's no cracks or anything that the owner should be worried about. Okay, I very cleverly didn't put anything away, so I know exactly what I used on this job. One 12-inch long maple flat side sanding block with 600 grit sticky back sandpaper on it, one straight edge, one fret crowning file that matches the width of my frets, a safe edge fret end dressing file, a bad pick so that nobody walks off with it, a razor blade. This is 2000 grit, I believe, micro mesh sanding paper, sanding pad. It's latex cushioned, great stuff, useful for all kinds of stuff. A black Sharpie with a brown cap, because that's just a thing that I do for some reason. Some way to measure action height. This could be a gauge, a printable gauge that's free online, or you could even stack up picks of known thicknesses. The best present anybody ever gave me, my grandpa gave me these sharp wire cutters, good quality Phillips head screwdriver or slot head screwdriver. And I also used a pair of cheap digital calipers at one point. Didn't show it in the video, just was checking something. I didn't show it, but I used this firm cork sanding block just to knock off the corners of those fret edges because they were a little gnarly at first. And of course, mcguire's Mirror Glaze No. 9 Swirl Remover 2.0.
Okay, so at this point, the mandolin itself is in pretty good shape. It's ready for strings as soon as we get the bridge and nut dialed in on it. So I'll do those in another video. Thanks for watching.